Speaker today is Mary Fee from the Washington State Noxious Weed Control Board, and she's going to be giving you the weed list update today. With that, we'll give you Mary.
Good morning, everybody. Let me see if I can get my PowerPoint up here. All right. Are you guys seeing my PowerPoint?
Yeah, go to slideshow, Mary.
Yeah, can you see it there?
Perfect.
Awesome. All right. So I just want to thank everybody for being here on this beautiful Thursday. If you're on the west side, I hope you enjoy the rain. And if you're on the east side, I hope you're getting some sunshine or maybe a little bit of snow. I kind of like snow too. Anyhow, I'm Mary Fee. I'm the Executive Secretary for the Washington State Noxious Weed Board. And today I'm going to talk about the updates to the 2021 Noxious Weed List. Before we get to those actual updates though, I do want to go over the weed list process and what that looks like. So, to the weed listing process. So the weed list process starts in January. Excuse me. We actually in November, we accept proposals from anyone to add species to the noxious weed list or to amend any species that are already on the noxious weed list. And that could be designation changes or changes between different classes of noxious weeds. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. And then in May, our Noxious Weed Committee gets together and reviews all those proposals. And at that point in time, they start looking at the priorities, the invasiveness of those proposals, different attributes of those noxious weeds that are being proposed. And then in September, the Noxious Weed Committee actually makes recommendations to the State Noxious Weed Board. And then in November, the State Noxious Weed Board holds a public hearing, which is next Tuesday for this year. And then after that public hearing, the Noxious Weed Board reviews any testimony that's given on proposed changes. And then they have a Noxious Weed Board meeting following the hearing, at what point in time they vote on changes to the noxious weed list. And then those changes are enacted by January of that following year. So for 2020, we've taken proposals, the committee has looked at them, made recommendations. We're having our hearing next Tuesday. And then after that, we'll have our board meeting. The board will vote on those. And then by January 1st, those changes will go into effect. Then the county noxious weed boards have 90 days to go ahead and update their own county noxious weed lists. And those county noxious weed lists have to include all the Class A noxious weeds, all the Class B designated noxious weeds, and then they can choose to add any Class B or Class C noxious weeds as selected noxious weeds, and those would be other ones that are required control in that county. Counties can also choose to do education and outreach on anything on the noxious weed list. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the different classifications. So Class A noxious weed are those noxious weeds that are very limited in distribution throughout the whole state. And so their requirement is eradication. If you have a Class A noxious weed on your property, then we want that eradicated, and we want it taken care of and gone because it's so limited. We do not want it to spread anywhere else throughout the state. Class B noxious weeds are a little more populated throughout the state, or maybe in certain counties. Maybe only some counties have higher infestation rates and other counties have lower ones. So those noxious weeds get put on the B list. And then they can be designated by the state for control, which means that required control is required in that county if it's designated by the state. And then counties can also pick up those weeds as selected noxious weeds, which also requires control in that county. A good example is Scotch broom, where it's very limited in Eastern Washington. So many of the counties in Eastern Washington are designated for control, but it's pretty widespread in Western Washington where control is a little bit more unfeasible. So many counties in Western Washington, it is not designated for control. And then Class C noxious weeds are those species that are on the noxious weed list that are a little more widespread, maybe not as economically feasible to control, or maybe there might be other reasons that it's on the Class C noxious weed list, but it's pretty much any other of the noxious weeds that aren't a Class A or Class B. And real quick, just so you know, a noxious weed is a non-native plant that is very invasive. It has to be both. We have a lot of non-native plants in Washington state that are not noxious weeds because they're not invasive. They don't take over our riparian zones or agricultural fields. They pretty much stay put where you plant them. So they're not noxious weeds. The flip side, we have a lot of native plants that can be very weedy and very invasive. However, they are native plants. So again, they don't meet the requirement to become a noxious weed. With that, I'm going to move on to the 2021 proposals. So this year we have 2 species that are new additions to the noxious weed list, being proposed as new additions to the noxious weed list: Turkish thistle and hanging sedge. And then we have other designation changes. There are noxious weeds that are already on the noxious weed list, but things that are changing, designation changes, things like that. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But first, I want to go over the new additions. So Turkish thistle, this was a proposal that was done internally through the Noxious Weed Board because it's been found in Oregon and Idaho. We may or may not have some in Washington. At this point in time, we don't know of any known infestations, but it really looks close to another thistle, Italian thistle, in Washington state, so there might be some misidentification, and hopefully we'll get that figured out. So it's an annual thistle, and it can be, as you can see in the hand there, it can be really little or it can grow pretty big. It has wing stems. It grows 3 inches to 4 feet tall. It usually has a single head with clusters of flowers in groups to 2 to 5. Again, it has populations in remote Northeast Oregon and Idaho. These areas are really difficult to access. They've been out treating them. They expect to find more. It's a fairly new weed species in the region, so we're not quite sure how bad it is yet in Oregon and Idaho. And we assume we probably have some infestations in Washington that we just don't know about. The seeds can spread by wind, water, and animals. It doesn't appear to be grazed. It doesn't look like wild animals are grazing it or livestock. The plants in Oregon and Idaho have been treated with herbicide, and again, no records in Washington. It is proposed as a Class A in Washington state. It was just listed as a Class A in Oregon and listed on the noxious weed list in Idaho. So we're all in the region trying to go after it and eradicate it and not let it take over. So hanging sedge is the second one that's a new species being added to the noxious weed list. King County proposed this as a monitor species, but it is being considered as a Class A. We don't know quite how much there is. It was an ornamental plant that has been planted, and it's very weedy or invasive in riparian areas. It was native to Europe and Northwest Africa, sorry. It's an evergreen perennial clumping sage. It can spread out up to like 6.5 feet wide. It has long, narrow, drooping spikes. You can see in the picture with the hand, the spike, typically 4 to 12 inches long. Hanging sedge can produce over 20,000 seeds per plant, which is quite a few. It likes partial shade and wet and moist soils. Again, found in riparian areas. It's outcompeting some of our wetland vegetation. And it was originally planted ornamentally. Again, a number of King County locations have hanging sedge, but we're not quite sure how much hanging sedge is really out there. And again, it was proposed as a monitor list species, but it is also being looked at as a Class A species because of the invasiveness and not knowing quite the extent of its infestations. It is found in southern BC and Oregon. It's noted to being very tough to control in ornamental settings and yards. All right, so that was the 2 species that are new to being added. Now I'm going to talk briefly about 2 species that are designation changes that were proposals from county noxious weed boards. The first is wall hawkweeds, the wall subgenus. Snohomish County had asked for this to be undesignated in Snohomish County. It does dominate roadside areas, really likes disturbed soils. It's a perennial, and And when you break any part of it, it has this white milky sap that oozes out of it. Flower heads are composed of yellow ray flowers. Plants typically have basal leaves on the stems. Leaves are edged and toothed. Seeds are very small with ribs and grooves and have bristles on one end. This
was the 3 minutes, sorry.
Thank you. This is can get transported by wind, but lots of times it's transported by animals. The other Class B designation change that was proposed by a county was Ravenna grass in Chelan County. And Ravenna grass is already selected in Chelan County, so it doesn't change the requirement of control. It just elevates it to a state designated control rather than a county designated control. There's not very much Ravenna grass in Chelan County, less than 10 acres or so. Ravenna grass is a tall, large, non-native perennial. It can grow up to 13 feet tall. Leaves occur on the stems up to the base of the inflorescence. Flower spikes. The flower spikes can be 9 inches to 2 feet long. Basal leaves are long and narrow, 3 to 4 feet. The Noxious Weed Committee also reviewed 17 other Class B species for designation changes, just to make sure that they matched the current distribution throughout the state. Of those 17 species that the Noxious Weed Committee reviewed, 10 of them were ones that they decided to update the designation to match the distribution. And I'm not going to go over all of those, but just to let you know that those are being updated, and it's just a designation change, mostly things that are being designated because they're more limited than we thought they were. You can find those on our website. If you guys have any questions, I can take questions for a minute. And I did list our website URL there, so if you want to look at those other 10, you're more than welcome to. Okay, I guess I'll take any questions.
I had one that said, I have seen hanging sedge available for purchase online, mostly because it's not noted for its evergreen attributes. So it would make it hard to work on as a Class A unless it is added to the quarantine list. If it is added to as a Class A, will it go on the quarantine list? Otherwise, it can still enter the state through online purchases and possibly sold in nurseries.
You're absolutely right. So all Class A's, when a new species comes onto the noxious weed list as a Class A, it is automatically added on to the quarantine list. And that quarantine list then is managed by the WSDA. They're the ones that would add that to it. But all of our Class A's automatically get added to the quarantine list. Yep. Good question.
Now, there's definitely other ones, so hopefully you guys see her contact info there.
Awesome.
Karen, I think one worth answering. This is Ray. Hi, everybody. But someone's asking how can they stay abreast of public hearings and updates through the noxious weed stuff. So is there a list they can get on, Mary?
So we do post it on our Noxious Weed Board website under What's New. All the information about the noxious weed hearings are posted there. And then we do reach out to the local newspapers. We send about a news release out to about 100 local newspapers throughout the state. We don't necessarily have an email list for that, but definitely check the website. And we usually put the hearing information up early September. Traditionally, the hearing is the Tuesday before the Noxious Weed Conference, though. This year was a little bit different.
Okay, thanks, Mary.